welcome to Fireside Palaver, episode 14. This episode, we're going to be talking about all the drama surrounding the open game license with Dungeons and Dragons. Trust me, we're a literary podcast. We're going to talk about more than just that. We're also going to talk about David's top 10 books of 2022, and also the books that we reviewed in 2022. I didn't say both of our top 10s because I basically only read books that we reviewed for the podcast. So we'll be covering my top 10 and just doing those.
Right.
And then finally, we're going to do our third check-in for The Wastelands, where we read the third section, Demon and Door. Demon and Door, yeah. Which, oh man. Woo! I was not expecting what we got, David. I'll tell you that.
I hope in a good way.
It definitely threw me for a loop. So what do you know about this situation with the open game license and that whole thing? Before you answer, let me tell you my experience with it. I've had a lot of coffee, so I don't mean to just like jump in there. I spent all week debating about whether I could do a video about this by myself. And I was like, right. I don't think I'm energetic enough to do it on my own. I really need David here. And so I was like, well, maybe by the time we do the podcast, something will have happened to make it more interesting. Literally, literally the last like 3 hours have been like everything's happening. And like there was like a huge announcement from Paizo, like just moments before we started preparing for the show.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
The Paizo website is down right now. You can't even go to the website. So what do you know about it? And then I'll fill you in with whatever you've missed.
Well, I mean, the only thing I've read some of those things that we've been sharing are pretty long, and so I mean, like I just know that. It sounds like on one end they want to keep everything in house and keep like a control, and so like not as many hands in the cookie jar type thing. But then that kind of flies in the face of what fans have been doing for 40 years, or
That's exactly right. I mean, it's like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. Like.
Right.
They are trying to still use the open term. So for anyone that I feel like most people are aware, but like there's OGL 1.0, which was basically an open game license, which was based around the Linux community. This guy Brian, let's see, his name is in this article because he comes into play right here, at the end in the new information that just happened. Brian Lewis. So he originally, back in 2000, wrote with Wizards of the Coast the open game license, which basically allowed for fans to like create fan content that would fit into the Dungeons and Dragons, into their product, but there was guidelines to make sure they didn't like break any copyright or anything. Like I think under the OGL, like there's still things that like you can't do. Like I don't think you can just take a trademark IP from Dungeons and Dragons and call it your own. Like you obviously can't do that. Right. But things like game mechanics, even terminology within game mechanics was allowed to be used under the open game license, and that's why we see like a ton. Like I mean. There is so much content out there that was released under the OGL 1.0, even so much so that many of the creators and staff at Wizards of the Coast, that's their background. They came from that background. And they're still trying to like use that title and like kind of honor that tradition while the rumored, we got to say that it seems to be pretty credible, but I don't know that we really know that it actually is what they were expecting. The OGL 1.1 is what they were calling it. There was a leak of what that could look like, and the leak was corroborated by several different people, so it seems legitimate, but we really don't know. And WOTC has basically not come out and said anything like really about it. But it said things like there was like places in there that would talk about like if you made over a certain amount of money, then you'd have to pay, towards this license fee. You'd have to pay WOTC something. WOTC could revoke this version of the license within a 30-day notice. And if you made content, they possibly could use it in their own property. Like you're basically signing that they have permission to do that. These are the types of things people were saying was in this. I didn't actually read it, to be honest with you. I didn't read it. I don't want to say intentionally, but like I don't want to take it at a word for word credence until it's actually until Wizards of the Coast actually says this is what it is. Right, exactly. But there was a whole slew of rumors going around. I heard wild things that couldn't possibly be true. Things like, Wizards of the Coast is going to own the rights to have virtual tabletops. Like, even if you want to play another game that's not Dungeons and Dragons, like under this license, there's no possible way. Like, every game company in the world would fight that in court. Like, there's no way that's a real thing. But it did seem like it was like a very predatory license agreement.
Right. And one of the things I saw was, which you kind of mentioned on earlier, which stood out to me, was you create something, then they have the right to just say, okay, it's ours now, and we can monetize it, and it's our intellectual property, regardless of whether or not you created it or what.
Yeah, we haven't read it. I don't know for sure, but that's what everybody was talking about. And it definitely seemed like it was threatening people that basically have developed there's entire companies, and people's livelihoods are all based around this OGL 1.0. And there was even a rumor, and I don't know where this rumor came from because I can't imagine it was in the terminology of the OGL 1.1 leak. But something, there was there's also been lots of quotes from, leadership at Hasbro and at WOTC saying that they were trying to make Dungeons and Dragons and D&D Beyond more like a video game with like microtransactions, so that in particular kind of turned me off. But they also talked about how there was a lot of rumor floating around, and I don't know exactly where this stemmed from, but there was a lot of rumor floating around that WOTC was considering revoking the original OGL license, which I personally don't see how they could do. And I don't know that they really were considering that. But that was kind of the big thing that really sparked the internet off. Like, people were like, they cannot do this. Like, they can't. There's companies out there that are producing for that OGL 1.0 that they can't exist anymore if they do that. There's no verbiage in the original license that they can do that, but there's no verbiage that they can't. And so, and so a lot of people were hanging their hat on well, if they didn't say they can't do it, then technically they can do it. And to me, that's just not enough. That's just, there's not enough meat on that bone for that to be the real thing. I listened to
you can see lots of lawsuits with that coming forward, with the vague language. So people are going to fight that.
And the big thing there too was how if they lose one lawsuit, then they lose everything. If they lose one lawsuit, then that sets precedence, and no one can ever challenge that again. I mean, and what do they gain? What do they gain from winning? Almost nothing. If they're allowed to revoke the OGL 1.0 and they revoke it, they lose all of these content creators that are not going to be willing to sign the new one, which now I've seen people calling it 2.0. I don't know if they've changed their terminology just today or what. I don't know. A lot has happened in the last couple hours. But yeah, just this whole thing was just a huge disaster.
And then, D&D is a very, I won't say niche fandom, but that's like spurring a lot of your hardcore fans that who may not even be OGL creators, but
right,
you know, they know those games and they like all those things, and then they see like, you know, here comes, you know, the man coming down, and you know, that just D&D's always been this like,
and it's
like
extremely
yeah, like
it's extremely creative. Like
yeah, it's all imagination based. It's all like people sharing ideas, people like coming up with their own campaign. I mean, like people have been coming up with their own campaign since the starter set came out in 79 or 80 or whatever the first year D&D came out. Like, it's never been just about buying what they put out. It's always been like, oh, you know, I've got a great imagination and I'm really into this. I'm going to write this really cool thing, and then you share it with friends. And
the concept of Dungeons and Dragons and of tabletop RPGs in general, but the godfather of it all, the concept is that you're telling a story together. It's a collaborative story that, I mean, it's literally a creative endeavor. And so it's a community that attracts creative people that want to create things for this thing that they love. And that's like why they're a fan of it. And it just shows like a complete like disassociation, like just completely out of touch with your community if you think they're not going to be upset about something like this. I watched a fantastic interview with Ryan Dancey. I'll leave a link to it in the show notes. He was one of the original people that helped design the OGL. And he talks about how it was, you know, they really kind of fashioned it after the Linux Open Source Foundation or the Linux Foundation and the open source licensing, and that it was meant to be a thing that made their product more valuable. As a matter of fact, he describes it as like, I was told like D&D was not profitable, and I was told to find a way to solve this licensing issue while also making it profitable. And he was like, this is the only way we could do that. The analogy that he uses that I think works really well is it's like having a telephone. If you own one telephone and you're the only person in the world that has a telephone, it's worthless. But its value increases based on the number of people in the world that also have telephones.
Right.
And Dungeons and Dragons is only valuable if other people in your town play Dungeons and Dragons. And the way you guarantee that there's going to be people out there playing your game is by allowing these creative people that you've attracted to your game to also invest in and have ownership in that community by creating their own content. I mean, it really is like a success story of, you know, I'm a big Linux fan. My career is in Linux. I do a Linux podcast outside of this podcast, and this OGL was like this unique place where like both of my interests kind of intersected in that way. And I think it's a huge success story to the open source community. Like, I think that like, because like D&D may have not survived their 4.0 fiasco if it wasn't for this OGL. And I just think it's astonishing to me that modern WOTC would not recognize that. Like, that's astonishingly ignorant to me. But anyway, so let me tell you what happened today. So there was supposed to be an announcement this afternoon, and I added it to my calendar to watch their live stream on Twitch.
From Wizards?
From Wizards, yeah.
Okay.
And the speculation, I don't know that they ever officially said, but the speculation was that it was going to be the OGL 2.0. And that never happened. So meanwhile, while this is going on, there was another live stream from what used to be a relatively small, relatively small. They have 11,000 subscribers. I don't know how many they had before recently, but they were saying that like a week ago they had like 3 viewers on on their live show, and then they had like 5,000 today. But like I was watching their stream, and they were waiting on the announcement at the same time, and it never came. And then they posted that they weren't going to do the announcement. There was an article written that they decided not to do the announcement. And a lot of it had to do with this hashtag OpenD&D movement, where people were unsubscribing to their paid subscriptions on D&D Beyond. Because that was another recent development, is that WOTC purchased D&D Beyond, and that was like a big like portion of their idea going forward for what they're calling One D&D. And so a lot of people are just unsubscribing like en masse. Earlier today, I went to unsubscribe, and the website was busy because just everybody's unsubscribed.
Many people were doing it.
And that's probably why they decided to cancel their announcement.
Right.
But in the meantime, not long after that canceled announcement, maybe an hour or two, Paizo posted on their Paizo blog, and I let me try it right now. I'll try to go to Paizo's website. Paizo's website has been down since they made this announcement because it's just getting too much traffic. It's either down or running slow. It's running slow. I don't know if it's going to load. But I have a backup article here from Gizmodo where they cover the announcement by Paizo. But they announced a new gaming license. So this is according to Gizmodo. Not Gizmodo. Yeah, Gizmodo. Tabletop role-playing company Paizo has released a statement following the delayed announcement of Wizards of the Coast Open Game License 2.0. The company, many of whom are formerly Wizards of the Coast executives, developers, and lawyers, has announced that they will be pursuing the creation of a new creative license for third-party developers, which they say will be, and then they quote, open, perpetual, and irrevocable. This is the Open RPG Creative License, or ORC for short. And
nice.
Yeah, it's really cool. And here's, dude, it's being upheld by this Azora Law, which is co-founded by Brian Lewis, who is an attorney who developed the legal framework for the original 2000s OGL at Wizards of the Coast. And he says that it will provide a safe harbor against any company being bought, sold, or changing management in the future and attempting to rescind rights or nullify sections of the license. They hope to pursue an establishment of a nonprofit like the Linux Foundation to hold the final edition of the ORC license. In order to pursue more system agnostic and fair license, Paizo states on the site that they have a growing list of publishers. So get this: so the list of publishers that have all agreed to back this ORC license. You have Cobalt Press, Chaosium, which you and I just recently played our very first Chaosium game, because that was the Call of Cthulhu is published by Chaosium. Green Ronin, Legendary Games, Rogue Genius Games, and they're looking to add more. So I just think this is like an amazing story of like the like underdog, like
all getting together, like,
yeah. I mean, it just, so there's two things that I take away from this. Is like, one, I just can't believe, and again, we haven't seen the announcement yet from Wizards of the Coast, and whether this was 100% accurate or not, it ain't no more. They're going to announce something, and, it's not going to be what people thought. Whether they were right or wrong, right, it's not going to be what people thought, because they will have changed it by now, even if it was. But I think that is astonishingly ignorant to believe that they could like reverse, like retroactively revoke that original license.
Right.
With the amount of community that it has now, and I can't believe that they got to be smarter than that. I don't think that was ever really in question. But even the idea of the clauses that are in this new license would be okay if they didn't call it open. I mean, come on, don't open wash this thing. Like, that is not an open license, you know, call that something else. You know, that's a special agreement license that you can have outside of the OGL, but the OGL still exists for the things that they release under the OGL. Yeah, it's just crazy. And then the second part of the story that I love is that Paizo got to step in and be the hero. And this lawyer who originally, Brian Lewis, who originally helped write the original one, is now going to be part of this team in this new license that is going to protect the new one. And if it ever gets called into question in the court what the original intent was of the original license, how can WOTC say that Brian Lewis doesn't understand the original intent of the license that he helped write?
He helped write. Yeah, exactly.
It's insane. It's insane.
My question, has Wizards gone through some sort of change as far as their top people recently, or maybe over the last? Because it sounds like
they've been owned by Hasbro for a while.
Because whenever some company may be having some sort of issue, and then they bring in these people that are supposed to turn it around.
Elon Musk bought WOTC.
Right. But they don't know the culture of what they're stepping in. That's what it sounds to me like. Because if not, then these people have completely gone away from everything that they have known, essentially.
So I'm both a Magic the Gathering fan and a World of Warcraft fan. So I feel like I have seen this happen. But the explanation that I heard, and I just heard this through various podcasts and things, so I don't know Jack, but this was the first time period, like the last couple of years, this was the first time period that D&D really blew up to be this huge thing. That before that it was just a complete Hasbro didn't see it as a big money maker. It was just okay, yeah, it's cute that they do D&D, but everybody's buying Pokemon and Magic the Gathering. Nobody's, it's just it's just a thing. We'll keep it around forever because people would be mad at us if we got rid of it. And then the last couple of years, just with 5e blowing up the way it did, I think that it's now the more executive types of the company that didn't really pay attention to it before are now oh, we can make movies and TV shows, and we can make something out of this. What if D&D were more, because the big microtransaction thing. I wanted to touch on that a little bit. I think that this new license and this whole thing was all about they're releasing a tabletop, online tabletop. I forget what they call it, a virtual tabletop. And I think that all this was they're trying to set up for, if you want to make content for their virtual tabletop, then they want to make sure that you're not too successful. They want to make sure they get a cut of that if you're super successful. And you know how whenever we use D&D Beyond and someone wants to they want a particular race, I think you might have a subclass where we had to pay $2 to buy your subclass from some book we didn't have. I think they're wanting to do a whole lot more of that, to the extent that there would be even more of that type of microtransaction, which if I trust a company, I'm okay with. I understand why they would want to pursue that business model, and I understand that they need to make money. They're a publicly traded company, right? I understand that concept, but if you're going to sell me microtransactions, I want it to be from a company that I trust is not going to just unbalance the game because they want people to do the microtransactions. And this whole debacle with the community being in an uproar about this license, and then they just don't say a word, and that is not building trust. And
no, not at all.
When I first heard about 1D&D, I was oh, people are way overreacting. This is not a big deal whatsoever. I trust I trust Wizards of the Coast. I don't know why. I've been playing Magic forever. I don't know why I trust the Wizards of the Coast. But like, I was like, I trust the people that are behind D&D. Seemed like this is like their life. Like this is what they want to do. And I don't think it's them that is causing all this bad faith, but they have done everything that they could possibly do to burn my trust to believe that they're not going to just like, okay, well, if you want to use this particular weapon or you want to use this particular set of spells, then you're going to have to pay $4. And, you know, they're going to be so good that like you would be an idiot if you didn't use that set. You know what I mean? Like you would,
right?
And so that just seems predatory.
You can't finish this campaign without it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Or we'll make it so that someone in the group has to have this.
Has to have something.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. 3 or 4 months, or I don't even know how long it was that I saw the video about 1D&D. But when I saw that video, that wasn't a worry that crossed my mind. But now this has this has completely changed my opinion there.
Sure.
I think the only thing that they're going to probably come out with some sort of like try to get back in our good graces kind of thing. And I don't
listen to you guys.
Yeah.
We heard you.
But I got to tell you, I'm a fan now. I already had this book. I didn't just go get it in the last couple hours. But I've never played Pathfinder. I've always wanted to, actually, because I think it's a little more complicated. I use that's a negative. Right. That's got a negative connotation. But I find 5e a little too simple for me, honestly.
Complex.
Yeah, it's a little more tactical, we'll say.
Yeah. I played Pathfinder a long time ago, but
oh, really?
So I don't remember much of it.
So I'm a fan now. I've never even played a game, but the way that they just like stepped in with like, you know, everybody under the sun is scared that their livelihood in some cases, but even if it's not, even if they're just fans and they don't necessarily make material, everybody is just so worried that like this is going, like they're going to revoke the original license. And Paizo stepped in and said, nah, we don't think they will. And if they do, we'll go to court. We'll go to bat for you. But we're also going to do this other thing where this can never be threatened ever again, you know? And I just think that's so badass. Like I'm a Pathfinder fan. I've never even played the game. I'm a fan forever now. Even if I never play the game, I'm still a fan.
You got to figure that obviously the pandemic affected this in some way, because when people were at home and you couldn't get together as a group too, that your only choice was like D&D Beyond and stuff to play. You know, that had to set off the thinking that, hey, now that we've captured a larger group of people playing online, how are we going to make money off of this? And then, you know, sometimes you get blinded by that.
Yeah, and
hopefully that's what it is, that they just kind of got carried away a little bit of their thinking.
That's definitely what it is, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that line of thinking. I think that it was smart to do that. Let me tell you, there's card games that I Keyforge. I was like really into Keyforge, but like one, nobody around here played it, and two, you couldn't play it online. You had to play it in person. And then the pandemic happened, which, what an unfortunate turn of events. This card game that's like designed around playing in person comes out in like 2019. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just they can't do that and lose your trust. Right. And I think that's where they messed up. And I don't know. For a lot of people, they won't gain it back. I play 5e because of you guys, because we have a campaign, and I love you and I love playing our game because of that. But I want to try something else, and 5e was like a gateway drug for me into these types of games, and I think it is for so many people. Like, I don't think that Star Trek Adventures, which is one of my favorite games, I don't think it would be successful if it hadn't have been for people jumping on to 5e and then seeing what else was out there. So I don't want to see them go under. Right. But yeah, I don't know. I hope that this is kind of a wake up call for them in some
It
ways.
sounds like it is.
Yeah.
If they're not making an announcement, that's a big tell right there.
There was also, in addition to Paizo's announcement, Modifius also announced that it's not an open license. And here's the thing. Modifius's announcement of the 2D20 World Builders Guidelines. That's the name of the article. It's called the 2D20 World Builders, and it's going to be released in conjunction with Drive-Thru RPG. But it's basically a set of licensing that they are saying is not open, but if you asked me, it's far more open than anything that Wizards of the Coast is calling open. And it's you can use their rule set for your intellectual property. And they want no ownership of your IP, but you're only allowed to change their rules, like in small ways. Like you can't like drastically overhaul their rules.
Right.
But they said you can make some tweaks, just not so much that it feels like something else.
Right.
And of course, you're using your terminology. Like you can't use the same like stat names as what's in Star Trek Adventures or something like that. But I think that's a really cool announcement from them too, and I hope that they're also a company that has released things under 5e rules, so they must have used the OGL 1.0. It would be nice to see that they also in some way support this Paizo thing, but they may not because they're doing their own thing, so I don't know. But this started you and I talking. I'm kind of liking the idea to toy with writing an adventure for something, or writing something that we could release under one of these.
Yeah.
And
you have to read in depth to see what all is involved, but
yeah,
like I've always had ideas of, man, this would be like a cool idea for a game or whatever.
Yeah, I would say I'm 50-50. The other night when we played Call of Cthulhu, it was a very bad example. I didn't think that session went very good. But that was an example of where I was just making it up as we went along. But especially in Star Trek, which obviously you can't release anything under the World Builders that's actually Star Trek.
It's already right.
Right. But I've made up a lot of those sessions that my Star Trek group plays, and I make up a whole bunch. Even our 5e game that we're playing, we're following a book, but I make up a lot of that shit.
Yeah.
I feel like you and I could come up with something. I feel like we could come up with something. So I don't know. We'll work on that. We'll make it a part of the podcast too.
Right. That would be quite enjoyable, I think.
Yeah, that would be fun. Anyway, thank you for letting me talk your ear off about that. No. I've been like walking around the house telling my wife, and she doesn't care. I'm like, no, you don't get it. This is a true David and Goliath story.
Exactly.
All right, let's do our best books of 2022. How do you want to do this? You actually have a legit 10 through 1 list. Do we want to do your top 10 list, or do we want to go through the ones that we read last year on the show first?
There's definitely a few of mine that we did on the show. But there's a few that,
that I didn't read.
I read on that you didn't read.
Yeah.
And then there was some I would have included on this list, but I wasn't exactly sure if I read them in 2022.
Yeah.
So, I'll go through my list if you want to. I'll go ahead and start.
All right, let's do yours first. Let's do it first, and then we'll recap what we did last year.
Okay. So, going from 10 down. This was one that I kept putting on and taking off because I'd be like, oh yeah, I forgot about this book. And then it started actually lower and then made it to 10, which was Dune by Frank Herbert. It's a great book.
I forgot that you read that this year.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed it. It was different though. That's why I didn't rate it higher. Like from some of the other books, like the Brandon Sanderson books and things like that. It was a great world and universe and stuff like that, but it was not quite as, I don't know, in depth. I mean, it was in depth, but it wasn't like them. And there's a whole lot more. Like, there's so many Dune books. Like, Sanderson's working up to what was there supposed to be 10
There's
in the
10 Stormlight Archive. Yeah.
Stormlight Archive. I mean, there's probably 40 Dune books so far. I mean, so
Yeah.
like, but I enjoyed it, and I like the characters, and I like the movies and all that that's come from them. So like,
I'm
it was a good
scared.
read.
I'm scared to pick up Dune. I and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. I feel like it is like super detailed and like super dry.
It is.
I'm sure it's fantastic, but I feel like it's extremely detailed and I'm scared to pick it up.
Well, it's one of those books where you've got like, if you had like a dictionary of Dune terms and things
Yeah.
like that you need it, because like, they just jump right into some things, and you're like, for a while, I was even had watching the old movie,
Yeah.
previously. I still got into it. Was like, I have no idea who they're talking about or what they're talking about, and so yeah, it's definitely a good book. I mean, I recommend it if you like sci-fi and stuff. It's definitely a good read.
I think it's on my
Uh,
bucket list. It's one that I will eventually read, but I'm not
and
ready
it's a
for it yet.
fast read. It's not you or anything, so you can blow through it rather quickly.
Hmm.
Um, the next book would be Fire and Blood by George R. R. Martin, which is basically the Targaryen history. I know you didn't ever finish watching, did you, or anything?
No.
But it's basically, it takes place when the original uh, Aegon the Conqueror comes over to Westeros and takes and conquers Westeros with his dragons and stuff, and then it goes almost. I think it stops about kind of right around where the show that they're making now stops, and then apparently he's going to have another book, because the the one thing I'll say about the book is you're just going along and you're going in the story, and then the book just ends, and you're just like, okay, that was weird. Like, you're like right in the middle of something, and it just ends.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's supposed to be like a history book, and the one weird thing is that it is uh, takes place from three different perspectives. So there's
Hmm.
three people. So like, you'll have one story, but you'll hear that same story from the three different perspectives, and they might be different. Like, there's one that's like a maester. There's like the court jester, and then I forgot what. I think it was just some historian, but one guy might know or thinks he knows a certain thing this way, but another guy thinks it's this way, and they don't jive with each other. But they tell both of the stories. But it's a really good book. It's a cool, like, if you like that world, it's definitely worth a read, because he's not apparently releasing any other books. So why not read those books?
Yeah, I watched a review about that book recently. Actually, I don't know why, because I haven't read it. I haven't read any of those books. But that was the person doing the review. That's what he said, is like he's disappointed that we're not going to get another of the Song of Ice and Fire actual main storybooks anytime soon. But he's also super excited about the next Fire and Blood book.
So
so,
yeah.
so it sounds like it's a good book if you're in that world.
Yeah, definitely. So my next one, number 8, would be Gwendy's Final Task, which is a trilogy. Um, the first one is written by Richard Chizmar and Stephen King. The second one is written just by Chizmar, and then the third one, Stephen King jumps back in, and it's a really good book, really good story, really good way to finish out that. There's definitely some in the last one, especially. There's a lot of Dark Tower reference and stuff in it,
Oh,
which is
cool.
really cool. So I enjoyed that. Definitely something you should check out. They're all fairly small books, and easy to read.
I'll check it out.
Yeah. Uh, Seventh was Words of Radiance, which is one that we did review.
Yeah.
Again, it was from the ones we've read. It was, I hate to say it's least favorite, but it's like
yeah, it's my
the other
least
two
favorite.
were just better. You know, it wasn't anything wrong with it. The other two were just better.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. It's also hard because those books blend together, and I can't remember which events took place.
Right, exactly.
In which, but it's
Just
easy.
so long.
Yeah, and it's easy to remember what happens in the beginning and the end. Because, well, I say the end. The last book we read was Oathbreaker, so it's the end for us. Even though there's one more book. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I like the book, but it's my least favorite.
Well, going along with that, like I remember stuff from the first book, and I remember stuff from the last book.
Yeah, I would have
and
to.
A lot of the stuff in the Words of Radiance is kind of muddled
to skim
for
through.
me.
Yeah, I'd have to skim through and remember everything.
So yeah, so I mean, it's definitely you have to read it if you're reading the series, obviously, but it's the least standout so far. Number 6 was Billy Summers, which by Stephen King. Really good book, different from him. It's about an assassin instead of like what you normally think of as your horror kind of.
Is he like a modern day like hired gun type assassin, or is this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's a really good story. I didn't know what to think going into it, but he knocked it out with that one. It was really good. 5 is Let Me In by John Ajvide Lindquist.
I forgot you read that this year.
That was I'd seen the movie. I'd seen the American version of the movie
Let the Right One In,
and then the Swedish or whatever version of it. And so I was like, I'm going to read it. And it's a really cool take on vampire stories. And, there's one thing like with horror in general, like when it involves kids, it's even creepier.
Yeah, no,
it's like when you have a kid vampire, it's like, that's just creepy as hell.
I think I'm more sensitive to stuff than you. I think that would be a hard one for me to read, honestly.
Yeah, well, it was for me.
I know a lot about it. I know a lot about it because it's like one of Scott's favorite books. But and I've seen both versions of the movie. But yeah, I think it would. Yeah, it'd be hard.
Yeah,
for me to get through.
There's some.
Stephen King makes me uncomfortable. A lot of times we're reading Stephen King, and I'm like, whoa, we gotta get through this part. I don't know.
Exactly. So my next 2, 4 and 3 would be 4 would be Way of Kings and 3 Oathbringer. I kind of went back and forth with those two. The only reason I put Oathbringer just ahead was just because of that last section of Oathbringer. Yeah. I thought it was just fantastic. But they were both really, really good books. Just the world building and the character development and the characters, and like you get so invested in it. It's just amazing. Amazing. Yeah.
You could tell we're big Dalinar fans.
Yes.
Those two are our favorite books. Yeah. But I agree. That's the lineup for me, the way you have it.
So my next 2, I put 1A and 1B because the two books.
I'm sorry. Before we go on, I said on the last episode, I said the opposite. But I said
that's right.
Yeah, but I said on some days I would say the other way around. They're close.
Well, that's what. When I think I originally did that, I had Way of Kings up there, and then I was like, part 5 was so awesome. Yeah. I was like, I gotta put it up there.
Yeah.
So my next 2, like I said, I put 1A and 1B, just because the 2 books are so vastly different, but just so like fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I couldn't decide which one I like better. Hex by Thomas Olduvelt is it's so wonderful and different. It's like it's horrific. Like it's a horrific book. And just kind of a general synopsis. It's about a town in New York that's been hexed or by a witch that was
Yeah.
back in the 1700s, and the it continues on to today. And there's the witch appears and disappears and walks through the town. And if you're born in the town or if you move in the town, you can never leave. So you're stuck in that town. If you try to leave after being maybe gone a week or two, you'll start having these thoughts of wanting to commit suicide. And if you don't get back to town, you will go through it.
Wow.
And so hex is kind of a double entendre because, the town is hexed, but they also have a police force called Hex. And they have put surveillance cameras everywhere. And everybody in the town has an iPhone that's just for the town. And it has an app on it where you can track the witch and like if you see something and things like that. And
that sounds really cool.
Yeah, and then like the gist is some of the kids in the town are tired of this and they want to kind of break out of this thing. And the witch's eyes and mouth are sewn shut because if she opens her eyes or is able to whisper to you, something's awful going to happen. And obviously, it's a horrific book, so some horrific things happen.
Yeah, I read about this book. I haven't read the book, but I read about this book, and I don't know what it is. I've not been spoiled, but all the comments on this book talk about how horrible, like not horrible in that it's not good, but just like the ending apparently is like
it is one of the ending. I was not expecting. I read it, or I actually listened to that one. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe like this is, yeah. So 100% and that might be one that we could review sometime down the road because I think you would really like it. And it's not a long book either, so it's very fast and it's really good. The last book, it's called A Man Called Uwe, which right now there's a movie out called A Man Called Otto, the Tom Hanks movie that just released about 2 weeks ago, I think.
Are they related?
Which is based, it's based on this book.
Oh, okay.
So I haven't gone to see the movie, but this is a book my dad recommended, and my dad typically reads like nonfiction type things, and he's whatever. But he was like, I just read this book, and he was like, it is maybe the best book I've ever read, and that's coming from my dad. That's saying a lot. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to check this out, and that's one I listened to as well. As far as listening, J.K. Simmons does a narration, and it's fantastic. He's the guy that plays J. Jonah Jameson in the Spider-Man movies, and that he's in like every TV show and movie now. But so anyway, it's essentially like, again, totally different from what I've been reading. It's a crotchety old man that lost his wife, and he's a widower, lives alone. He hates everyone and everything, and he basically just wants to commit suicide and be done with the world. But every time he tries it, something happens and it kind of stops him. And then, obviously he kind of opens up to things and people, and it's just, you'll laugh out loud on one paragraph and you're ugly crying 2 pages later type book. And it was just, it was one of the books that probably moved me more than almost any book I've ever read. As far as emotions and the range of emotions. And I can't say enough. You should read this book. It is, or listen to it. Either way, it is fantastic. I got Wendy from work.
Yeah.
I kept telling her about it, and she read it, and she said the same thing. She was like, oh my God, it's totally amazing. And again, it's not something I probably would have ever looked at or picked up.
Doesn't seem like your type of book, really.
No, and so yeah, I definitely
I
shed some tears and ugly cried during that book. And
I'll buy that. I'll put it on my goal for next year. I'll buy that one.
Becca would definitely love that book
Okay.
too.
Yeah.
Y'all should listen to it together or something
Yeah.
sometime. I mean, it is. I can't say enough about it. It's hard, without giving away stuff. It's so wonderful. Like just the writing, his character, like all the side characters that come in and out. He kind of takes in this stray cat and like the interactions between him and the cat, and like the guy writes like the ornery Best Buy customer, like that just mad as soon as they walk in, like every time, like that was him. I was like, oh my God, that's like so perfect. But it's close to being a perfect book as far as that goes. So, and it just thrilled me because it was different and I really enjoyed it. And at the end there, I put Fairy Tale. I finished it yesterday. So just barely missed on 2023, but as an honorable mention, Stephen King knocked it out with that book. It is you should finish it because it is definitely grim fairy tale meets Lovecraft. Like once it gets into the story, there's a lot of. I mean, he even mentions Lovecraft in the book, so.
Okay.
It is very Lovecraftian.
You've been interested in Lovecraft more recently than ever before, and that's probably why, because of that. Yeah, I have it. Oh yeah, it's behind me, right there.
Yeah.
And I started reading it between something else we were reading, and I do want to go back and finish it. I almost. So right now I'm doing the same thing. So we're reviewing The Wastelands, and I'm intentionally not. I'm trying to read a section and then we podcast about it and then I read the next section. So I have these gaps in time. And I actually started reading Pet Sematary because of what we were talking about last week with my dog and everything. Which she is, I don't know, it's ups and downs. She had some bad days, but she's been good the last 2 days. So I started reading Pet Sematary, but I might, if you want me, I don't know. I trust your judgment and what you think would be better for the podcast. I could put Pet Sematary down and then pick up Fairy Tale and try to read it real quick. I say real quick.
That one's hard to say. It really is because those two books, they're very different. Like Pet Sematary is horror.
I'm about the same.
Fairy Tale's not necessarily horror, but there's some, aspects of it when you get toward the middle, toward the end, but it's more of a adventure type, fantasy type story.
Yeah, but you just read it too, so unless I can read it really fast and then we review it together, there's really you don't want to read it again right after you just finished it. So I don't know.
But now, I'll give you some warning as far as Pet Sematary. You find there's some hard things to get through. In some of his books, there's a lot of stuff.
Oh, really?
Pet Sematary is like,
oh God,
wow! Like, yeah, it's horror. Yeah, it's definitely like, yeah.
All right. Well, I don't know. Well, I bet as far as
but it's so good. It's such a good book, though. Like,
yeah,
it's one of my top faves. So if you're reading it, I would say go ahead and finish it. And then I told Cooper I would listen to Fairy Tale with him again together.
Okay.
And so maybe we can do that down the road.
Yeah, we can try to time that up right. Okay. Well, I'm about to jump after this podcast. I will jump back on to The Wastelands to read the next section. So, it'll give me a little bit of time. But I think what I'm going to do is the trick that I used to do when we first started doing the podcast, where I would listen to one book driving to work while I read another book at home. I might do that between Pet Sematary and
that's what I'm doing right now. I'm reading Wastelands. Since I finished Fairy Tale, I'm reading or listening to another book, and then when Cooper and I are in the car together, we're listening to Misery.
Oh, really?
So I've got 3 books going right now. So
Yeah, well, at night I've been listening to a book that I don't really care about. I just wanted something to listen to fall asleep, but it just hit, and it's been okay, but it just hit the like real, like I feel like I have somehow stumbled into like a romance novel because it just hit. It's been following two characters. One happens to be a man, one happens to be a woman, and then the two stories just met. And now I realize, I'm like, okay, this is what the rest of the book. This is what the rest of this book is.
Star-crossed lovers.
Yeah, so I might actually drop it because I don't know if it opened really good, but I don't know if the rest of the book's really that style. It's the Demon in Silver is what it's called. In case anybody watching is interested, it starts out really good, but yeah, it gets really romance novel-y. It takes a hard left turn. So books that we read together this year and reviewed on the show is these are not in order. I think the first one we did was probably The Way of Kings. I don't remember. But I got The Gunslinger. So obviously we've been going through the Dark Tower series. So we did The Gunslinger, The Drawing of the Three, and then right now we're reading The Wastelands. Which
and the one thing with my top 10, I didn't include any books I had previously read. So I didn't include any Dark Tower books because
true. Yeah, because you didn't read them for the first time last year.
I didn't read them for the first time last year, so I figured that.
Yeah, and I read so much slower than you that I don't have a top 10 list other than these books. And I would say out of those three books, The Drawing of the Three is still my favorite. As a matter of fact, we had a conversation off air. I think The Drawing of the Three might be my favorite book I read last year. I love the Stormlight Archive books, but it's hard for me to compare them because they're so different. You know, the Dark Tower versus the Stormlight Archive. But what I loved about The Drawing of the Three was just I didn't know we were going there. I mean, I just got so surprised by, you know, the first book was just about this, you know, grizzled gunslinger traveling across the desert, and a lot of strange stuff happens in that book, and I didn't know. You don't know I was like, I'll read all these books just because David likes them so much, and I don't really know. I don't really know if like they're really my thing. And then the first part of the second book kicks off with this guy smuggling cocaine on a plane, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea. Yeah, and I love it just for that. It was just such a strange, like hard right turn.
That's a definitely a common theme with like Stephen King fans and like people. I tried to read The Gunslingers. I'm just not in the Dark Tower, and everybody's like, "Yeah, I get it from the first book if it's not your cup of tea, but you got to keep going because it changes so much."
Yeah, and you were telling me when we read The Gunslinger that some Dark Tower fans, when they're introducing people to the series, they'll tell them to skip the first book, and I can see why you might say that because The Wastelands actually does have flashbacks to the first book. So you kind of pick it up from The Wastelands. You almost don't even need to read the first book. But of course it is a more appreciation for it if you do. But yeah, had I read the first book without your guidance, I wouldn't have read the second book. I wasn't really all that into it. I was just like, David loves it, so you know, I'm gonna go along with it. But yeah, the Drawing of the Three was really good. And we did The Long Walk. We did that one for the show. I was not a huge fan of The Long Walk. I think Stephen King is a great writer, and in my opinion, and I know this is an unpopular opinion, that was my least favorite book that I've ever read by him. But it's got a cult following, and I can understand why people love it. I'm not saying you're an idiot if you like it. Definitely, I understand why. Horror Store was
on my list, and then the more I kept going through it, the more it moved up and then out. Which it was a fun read.
It's a fun read.
It wasn't like there was a lot of times when I was reading it, when I was rolling my eyes and like kind of thing like that. Like, okay,
yeah. My at Christmas, my sister-in-law, she's a big reader, but she doesn't really read horror or anything like that. She doesn't read Stephen King, and somehow the subject of IKEA came up, and I asked her if she had read this book, and she had. She actually owns this book. I just thought that was like bizarre because it's kind of I think it's an obscure title. I don't know.
You know, when I went to Barnes and Noble a couple weeks ago, I was looking around and like I saw a bunch of copies of it, and,
Oh,
and I was
really?
like, that's what it blew me away because I thought it was
Huh.
the same thing. I thought it was like
It may be more popular than we realize.
right,
Yeah.
like, and apparently he's got another popular book.
Yeah. The one that looks like a VHS tape on the cover.
It's God, The Last Survivor or
Oh,
something like that, and it's basically the trope is like, you know how in every horror movie, like the damsel at the, you know, there's always one girl that survives everything.
yeah.
Well, they all these women that have survived these things have a support group,
Oh,
and if
wow.
someone starts picking off people from the support group.
Dude, I don't know. I like him. I think it might be better than we thought it was because it seems like that's the only book we ever read by that author, and it seems like
Right,
his thing is like these like horror tropes that
right,
he's kind of doing like a cabin in the woods kind of thing.
exactly.
Um, yeah, we'll have to pick up another one of his books maybe this year. And then of course we did The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, Oathbringer, and Edge Dancer all this year, all back to back, mind you.
Right.
So I mean, this was the year of Sanderson for me.
That was a large chunk of the year.
Yeah, yeah, that was a huge chunk of the year. Do you know that Dawn Shard is another novella between books that we're
Yeah,
supposed to read?
I've got it on Audible. I haven't
I, s-
started that one yet,
I
but I've
started
got
to
it.
buy it. I started to buy it the other day. I saw it. I started to walk to the not walk out the store with it. I started to walk to the register and purchase it. But I think it's about Lopin. And I don't know if I can read a
Okay.
whole book about Lopin. I don't
I
know.
didn't even look at the synopsis or anything for it because I had so many credits for Audible. I was like, what do I need to get? And I was like, I know we got to get Rhythm of War, and then like it
Yeah.
popped up too, and I was like, oh, well, I'll just get that too because
Yeah.
I guess it comes before Rhythm of War.
I think so,
Um,
yeah.
so I'll listen to it maybe at some point, but
I don't know. If it's really the whole book is about Lopin, man, I don't know. I don't know if I can do it. I mean,
right,
Lopin is a great character.
Concho,
Yeah. He's a great character that like comes up every once in a while and I could deal with that. I love him for that, but a
right,
whole
the
book
whole
that
book,
just follows him saying Goncho and his weird cousins and stuff. I
yes.
don't know. I don't know if I'm into that. I hope that I read that somewhere and I hope it was a joke and I didn't get it. Um and then the only book that I read this year that you didn't read is The Glass Hotel. Um I read it because we watched the TV show Station 11
Station 11.
and I really like Station 11. And I purchased the book for Station 11, but I haven't read it yet. I might try to read that this year. And Emily St. John Mandel.
Yeah,
I always have to look. I can never remember Mandel. Um, I like her writing. She has like a certain like bluntness or matter of factness to the way she writes, but yet it still has prose. Like I like it a lot. It's just not a lot happens in this book really. Or maybe a lot, maybe too much happens, but nothing of consequence happens. The whole book is about
right,
like, these people's relationships and, it's just there it reads like a mystery novel, but there's never a mystery. Like
right.
the sort of the opening mystery of the book literally has to do with vandalism. It's not even it's like someone wrote something on a window and then like that spurs the whole story of the rest of the book. And then at the end of the book you finally find out who wrote that on the window, but it's like inconsequential. Like who cares?
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy. And there is like a kind of the big crime of the book is one of the characters is like running a Ponzi scheme and then he goes to prison and he starts seeing people that aren't there. They're like victims of his Ponzi scheme and there's like a lot of story elements that seem like they could have been something but they just never took off into.
Right.
There's actually one chapter that I thought this whole book could have centered around and it would have made a really good book. And it's like it's like way late in the book. It's like in the last quarter of the book. There's a chapter where this guy is a private investigator. He's a character from earlier in the book in the hotel, but in this moment, he's a private investigator. He's been like down on his luck. He was like one of the victims of the Ponzi scheme thing, and he is investigating this person that falls off a boat. And I don't want to say too much about that situation, but they're worried that the company is trying to cover it up. They have their own investigator, and so he's been hired to kind of assist the company's investigator to find out what really happened and just to keep the investigator for the company honest,
Right.
And but then there's this whole element of like, well, they offer him a job and he needs the money, but it's like it's kind of like, aside, like, well, then you kind of have to admit that like the way I say it went down is how it went down,
Right.
And I thought it was like one chapter towards the end of the book, and I thought they could have wrote a whole book about this. This could have been the mystery of the whole book. It's so weird. But I think she's a good writer. I just think that this was not the right book. And when I read reviews from people that had read her other books, that's kind of the way they all reviewed it. Like, it's not fair to compare this to Station 11 because it's one of the best books. Like it's actually it's actually like a superb book. But even compared to her other books, like this one was just like it just never found its pacing,
its voice.
Yeah. Because I was gonna get you to read it, but after I got so far into it, I was like, nah, I don't want to. I don't want to put this on anybody. Yeah. So I've got two other books, Station 11, and then there's one called The Sea of Tranquility, and it has a little bit better reviews, but by far the Station 11 is like what she's famous for. Yeah. And I'm interested to read it and see
the difference.
Yeah. Was it really an amazing book, or is HBO just so good at making television shows that they could have taken The Glass Hotel and made a fantastic show out of it? It could go either way. But that was the books I read this year. So out of all the ones that we reviewed, I think the one I was the most impressed with was the Drawing of the Three. And maybe that brings us to the next subject.
Wastelands.
Which is The Wastelands. We're going to recap basically what we read, so there definitely will be spoilers, so just be warned.
This was definitely kind of the crescendo to the first two parts.
Yeah, the finale of the first part, yeah.
Which, obviously you haven't got to the next one, but it's like, this is almost like two books in one kind of thing, because you got this part, and then this next part is like another story. So this kind of finishes the first half. I mean, it's almost exactly straight in the middle. Like,
it's right at halfway.
So, we know that Jake was experiencing the same things that Roland was experiencing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what all happened in this part. I get it kind of mixed up with Jake's section in the second part. How did this one open? What was the opening of this?
This is like where Eddie's having the dreams. I think that's kind of how it starts out right at the beginning, is Eddie's dreaming about New York and the house and his brother and things like that. But then he's making the key, and Roland's going crazy. Yeah. And Jake is doing the same thing. And he wakes up, he hears, like, he's having this, like, he can't sleep and stuff. And because at the end of the last part was when all the confrontation with his parents and all that stuff, and then he decides to go to sleep. Well, that night, like, he's restless and he can't do anything, and he gets up and he fishes through his jeans pockets and he finds the key that he got from the vacant lot. And as soon as he grabs the key, his voices disappear. They stop. And then he kind of tells Eddie through the dreams, like, Eddie hears a voice saying, let him know the key will stop the voices.
Right.
And then Eddie wakes up in the middle of the night and's like, walks over to Roland, and he gives him the wooden key that he's making, and as soon as he gives it to him, Roland's face like lights up and he's like, they're gone. Like,
that's right.
He has this big epiphany and like starts crying and all this stuff. And then there's a lot of dream sequences in this part. Because the next thing again is where Jake's dreaming of, he doesn't know it's Eddie obviously, but he knows that there's something about these two kids and what they're doing that he needs to, to find out what's going on. Like, he knows that this dream is important. So he knows at this point, hey, I've got to leave home.
Yeah.
And that's like when he wakes up.
It's like a young version of Eddie too.
It's a young version of Eddie.
The age Eddie would be in this time.
Yeah. I think he's 13. His brother was like 18 or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
But Jake decides he's leaving, which is interesting. He packs all the stuff. He steals his dad's gun. Yeah. And then he writes a farewell note, and he's just like, he couldn't decide what he wanted to say, and then he finally says something like, "I hope y'all are good," or hope y'all do well, or something like that. And that's it. Like, he doesn't really say anything else. And then leaves for good. He knows that one way or the other that this is his last day, either alive or in this version of reality, essentially.
It's so crazy that like he felt so out of place in this reality. That whole concept is crazy. Like he felt so out of place that he knew it was the right thing to do, or the right thing. I don't know that I'm convinced it's the right thing, but he believed so much so that it was the right thing, that he had no qualms about writing this note, telling his parents goodbye, just stealing he knew that like, oh, well, there's no consequence to me stealing the gun because I'll never be back here.
Right.
That's crazy. That's the part. That's what I kept thinking reading that part.
So then, again, this section kind of flashes back and forth between Jake's perspective and then the gang's perspective. But they wind up, they find a road in the trek that they're going through. It's like I think Roland calls it the old King's Road, maybe, that people had talked about, that he had never seen and things like that. And it's interesting. They have dinner. I can't remember if they've talked about the gunslinger burritos yet before.
I don't. Eddie makes a joke about it in this, but I can't remember. If
I can't remember. But that's one of these ongoing things that
Eddieisms.
Eddieisms, more gunsling burritos, and it's just some dried meat wrapped in some weird leaf.
Yeah.
But they come across one thing. They come across as an unusual animal called a billy bumbler. They describe it as like has rings on its eyes and a big bushy tail with stripes on it, and like they see one, and then when they're walking down, they finally get to where they start to see buildings and old things. There's like a wall, and there's billy bumblers all lined up on this wall. Billy bumblers are a very cool animal. They come up a lot. And,
okay.
There's all kinds of like fan interpretations of what they look like and things like that. A lot of drawings and things. But billy bumblers are really cool animals, so keep your eye out for them. But the main kind of theme of all this is the keys. So Eddie knows that this key is important. He's got to get it finished.
Yeah.
But he's afraid, and his brother's voice keeps coming back in, oh, look at the little, girly making the little carvings and blah, blah. And he's letting this affect him. And like, he doesn't want to, at first, he said he was excited to make this key. And now he kind of dreads making the key now that it's almost done. And,
the key, it's like, so whenever it was potential, he was excited about it, and then now he's worried about finalizing it, because what if he didn't do it right? If he never finishes, he never finds out,
Right.
And so he's worried about messing it up, but also I think he's just worried about like finalizing it and realizing he was wrong.
And he's letting his brother's
insecurity and projection,
tell him that he's not good enough to do it, and so he starts doubting himself.
At D&D the other night, I brought up to you that I wanted to talk about on the show that that all the characters at this point have some other voice in their head.
Yes.
Like Jake is hearing two other versions of himself, and Eddie is hearing his brother. Detta and Odetta, and Detta, she comes out. That was a funny. When we get to that part, but the funniest line in the whole book is like, Roland's like, "I'm gonna need Detta to come out," and she's like, "Oh, that bitch always around." But and then Roland is hearing voices. Now I'm not quite sure.
Is it basically he's hearing his other
kind of like what Jake is kind of
right?
Yeah, okay.
It's his voice, but it's a different version of Roland.
But even when Roland is not,
but he hears voices from his former teacher, his father, his friends, things like that. So he's always got an internal monologue going.
Yeah, I just that theme has been ongoing for at least since the drawing of the three, and I didn't really notice it until this book. I think Jake is what finally like kind of spurred it off, and Eddie's doing way more of hearing his brother and his brother being critical. In the drawing of the three, he would hear Henry, but Henry was more like giving him advice on like how what to do. It wasn't as critical as it's been in this book.
Yeah, you definitely hear a lot more from Henry, as in like there's the part where we'll get to this part later too, but where Jake sees them playing basketball. Mm-hmm. And he knows distinctly that he is letting his brother win, even though his brother's much bigger. He just he knows that Eddie could mop the floor with him. Mm-hmm. And it's Eddie's got this insecurity that even from his mom, that hey, Henry's giving up his life so he can protect you, and they keep telling and reinforcing this over and over again, that Henry's not who he could have been because he had to take care of you. And no mention of why mom isn't taking care of him. But so the Henry has done quite a number on Eddie. But again, they keep having this dream, and the dream that Eddie keeps having is a dream of when he's a kid, and he wants to go see this mansion, this supposedly haunted mansion, and he just knows that there's something about this that is important.
Right.
And so then he's been holding a lot of stuff in, and he finally spills his guts to Roland and Susanna, like, hey, this key's important. Jake is going to be here soon. We've got to be ready, and we got to get on the move. We got to, I've got to finish this key, but I don't want to, kind of thing. And then another cool thing that they in Jake's dream and in Eddie's dream, Jake has a dream where he's in their world, and he sees the sign on the side of the road that says, I wrote it down here, "Travelers beyond lies Midworld," and
Oh,
then
right.
later they come across that sign, and this is kind of the first time, like even Roland says, Midworld. He's like, I never thought I would see Midworld, and the stories, and you start realizing that this journey that Roland's been on for a very long time, he's still barely scratched the surface of this thing. He's in a brand new land. And he tells, says, Midworld was once one of the largest kingdoms and dominated the earth, a kingdom of hope and knowledge and light. And that there was a great city at the edge of Midworld. And, that's where you kind of start getting to this. Maybe there was a great, which they see the glimpse of it later. There's a great civilization that was here, and they're just getting into it. So then you got Jake walking around New York trying to kill time before he has to. He knows he's got to be, because Eddie tells him in the dream, "Hey, you need to be at this location and follow me, but don't let me see you. But you gotta be here at this time because this is where we'll be." But Jake had to leave so early that he's got to kill time, and like he goes on a little museum tour, and he gets some lunch, and then he's sitting out there, and this cop comes up to him, and he's like, "Hey kid, what are you doing? Shouldn't you be in school?" And he's also worried that by this time his parents know he's gone, so that they've probably alerted authorities, and this guy, this policeman may know or may figure out that, this might be a missing kid. And for whatever reason, he pulls the key out.
Yeah.
And immediately hypnotizes essentially the policeman. And then other people walking by that just happen to glance, stop in their tracks, and all start, ganging up around him, looking at this key. And
it's just he's able to. That part was like, first I thought about like on Doctor Who, how he has the magic paper or whatever that can look like whatever he needs it to look like. That's what it looks like. So whenever the cop looks at the magic paper, he would see his ID or whatever. I thought it was kind of like that. But then, it's just like any passerby that happens to catch a glimpse of it. They see in it. What are they just mesmerized by it because it's this otherworldly object? Like that is just so outside of this world that it has this effect on humans? Or do they see something in it, like they see what they desire or want to see? Or like, what do you think it is?
Kind of the same thing with the rose. Is it's some sort of force is being emitted from this thing.
Yeah.
And even though he is directly communicating with the cop, that other people are drawn by that but he says like people walk by and aren't affected really, but once someone sees it, it's that, and they know that there's something, but they kind of go into a dream state. And I put it like it was like because he tells the cop, "Hey, I'm such and such kid," like he gives him a fake name and all this stuff, and he's looking at an ID that obviously says Jake Chambers, but the cop is reading it as whatever name he's telling him, and it's the old Jedi mind trick,
He's just like staring at it like,
this isn't the droids you're looking for,
sure,
kind
kid.
of thing.
Yeah, sure, kid. That kind of thing.
And then like he backs away, and they're all just kind of just holding the key out as he backs up, and
as more and more people see it, he like
as more and more people sees it.
I thought that was a cool scene in the book, and like a bit creepy and otherworldly.
Right. It shows you the power of what they're dealing with too. But then Jake finally makes his way over to the area where he's supposed to be, and then you flash back to the other group, and they finally crest this hill, and they come up, and like down below them is this huge, vast valley, like with a big river and like all these tributaries flow into the rivers, and they see like grazing buffalo type creatures, and like way off in the distance, they see this enormous city with
Right.
spires and all this stuff. And Susanna was like, I don't know how far it is because the air here is clear. And it's not like smog and stuff like that and
Yeah.
pollution where you. So she said it could be 10 miles, it could be 500 miles, who knows? Um,
I
and
think
then
it,
Roland makes the thing like, oh, I've heard of this river, and like this is the legendary river of the Sindh River and all this stuff. And
I also just don't know how distance. We talked about this last time, but I don't know how distance really works
right.
in this world. You know.
Well, because he does say that the world is expanding.
Right. Yeah.
So what could have been however much distance a while back now could be, double that distance or whatever.
And
So
Susanna mentions when she sees the buildings that it reminds her of New York, and she's like, "Oh, what I would give to go back to New York again." But then she
yeah,
tells herself, "Like, no, I know that's not true.
no,
Yeah,
right.
I would never leave this place."
And then like one of the things that was interesting here, and I believe it's the first time they really kind of make this known and narrow it down, is when she's talking about that stuff. She
Yeah.
mentions that she's 28 years old and
Oh,
Eddie's
okay.
23 years old, and I think that because I've always wondered
I
that
pictured her
too.
older than that.
I did too, and
Yeah.
that's why, like, even however many times I've read through the story, I thought she was more of in her 30s, like mid 30s or something. But yeah, she's like, what's, if I went back with, Eddie to New York, I'm a 28-year-old black woman with a 23-year-old white bread kid and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. So that was kind of interesting to
Of
find
course,
out.
if they went back to 80s time, it wouldn't be that. It wouldn't be
It
that
wouldn't be as
unusual. Yeah.
right. They went back to her time, it would
It
have
would
been
be
a big
unusual.
deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but one of the things you get too from this is like the vision of the city. Like Eddie thinks of it like Oz. He says like it's their savior. He's like, obviously there's got to be like people they're going to be there that can help us, and like they're the savior. They're going to be able to answer all the questions I have about, like, he's building this thing up just from this, you know walking through the woods for months and not seeing anything
Right.
besides Susanna and Roland.
Well, think about
And
it. You all right? So Roland is to Eddie. Roland is this like alien that knows all about this world, and he's his window to this world. Well, then a city is like signs of like other people that would be like Roland. Only they, if they live in town, maybe they're not as weird as Roland is. Like maybe maybe
right.
he can actually meet some experts that can explain why the world is expanding. You know?
And then Roland also tells him, like, because that's, Eddie thinks, you need to tell me everything. Roland's just like,
I don't know.
actually, I don't really know that much. He's like,
Yeah.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I've only heard stories and legends and stuff. So now, Eddie's thinking, now I'm going to have all these
Yeah.
answers. And so he's building this thing up in his mind, whereas Roland's kind of trying to temper it like, hey, you know, if there's people there,
Yeah.
there's no telling. It could be like the mutants from under the mountain type thing.
Hmm.
But the one thing that, as Roland's scanning, that he comes across and his attention is focused on is he sees another speaking ring,
Yeah.
um, just like he saw with Jake. And when he sees that, he knows. He's like, that's it. That's where we have to be. This is
Yeah.
where the magic happens. And then Eddie says, "Yep, that's the place where Jake is going to try to come through, and they need to get there." But he needs to finish the key, um, and he doesn't like, now that Roland has been holding the key, or has been wearing it to keep the voices away. He's been hesitant to take it back too, and he's using that as an excuse too. Like, oh, I don't need to work on the key because Roland needs it more than I do. Um, and then he starts saying, like, Roland is very good at like seeing through things, and he
Mm-hmm.
knows, like, he's made a few comments that, oh, you're hearing a voice. He
Yeah.
knows that Eddie is hearing his brother's voice, but he hasn't really come right out and said, I know you're hearing your brother's voice. But now, like, Roland says, it's time for me to teach. And, like, he basically lays into Eddie
Yeah.
and, is,
Well,
I
I
put,
think that Roland can identify with that because of what we were saying earlier, where he's been hearing Court's voice, for years, and I think he can relate to it in a way. He can spot it, you know.
um, there's a few really good quotes around here, and I'm gonna read this one. He's like, Eddie's like put his hand by the gun, like saying he's gonna kill Roland,
Yeah, yeah,
and Roland says, "You haven't finished the key, but not because you are afraid to finish. You're afraid of finding you can't finish. You're
yeah,
afraid to go down to where the stones stand, but not because you're afraid of what may come once you enter the circle. You're afraid of what may not come. You're not afraid of the great world, Eddie, but of the small one inside yourself. You've forgotten the face of your father, so do it. Shoot me if you dare. I'm tired of watching you blubber."
yeah,
And that's basically like you're you're a prisoner inside your own self,
yeah,
and you're the like you have to believe in yourself. You have to stand up and be a gunslinger. And you know they kind of go back and forth, and he's like I'm forcing him to decide.
mm-hmm.
And then Eddie finally says, "I'm afraid, you numb fuck. Don't you understand, Roland? I'm afraid." And then then eventually it forces him to confront, essentially it forces him to confront Henry.
Yeah,
And
and his doubt. Yeah,
and his doubts, and even though he's still scared and afraid afterwards, he realizes that he has this ability. He can do this. And that's when all the stuff comes back, that the stream of consciousness of all this stuff that his brother was like doing to him and saying to him and putting him down, so that, because he even says that Henry knew, even if it was more deep down, Henry knew that Eddie was better than him.
mm-hmm.
And so he finally accepts that, and like his whole demeanor changes, and he's like, I did forget the face of my father, and I have let this control me and stuff. And you know he basically says, like, I've got to do this, and I can do this, and I will do this, type thing. And it's a big step as far as Eddie goes. Like, it's a really big step as far as Eddie goes.
So let me get an aside here a little bit, and I'm sure you know the answer to this because it's probably in the book more as the series continues. You've forgotten the face of your father. That whole saying. Whenever Roland says it, I take it as like, you're forgetting honor, like you're losing, you're doing something unhonorable, or it's almost like a Klingon style saying,
Right.
you are without honor, kind of thing.
Right.
I still don't quite get what he means by you've forgotten the face of your father. Like, what is?
I mean, I think it is that. I think it has several different uses depending on how you're using it. So like when like in this instance, it's like, because like the gunslinger creed is like
I did not shoot with my gun.
Greater, right, and all that stuff,
yeah,
and they're
yeah.
greater than, like, they're the part of the white. They're not superheroes, but like almost superheroes, and
Mm-hmm.
like to doubt yourself or to go against your teachings, or I don't think it's a. I think the face of your father is metaphorical, not necessarily
Yeah.
like, obviously you haven't forgot the face of your actual father, but like it's you forgot your training, you've forgotten like what you stand for, you've forgotten any of those ideas that go
Yeah.
against what the gunslingers stand for. And so it can be used in different contexts. But in this context, I think it's more of, you know, you've you've let Henry and you've let yourself doubt and you've let all this take away from who you really are. You're really the person that could whip Henry at basketball, and you read books and you knew how to carve when you were young and you were really good at it, and you could have been anybody you wanted to do, but you let him drag you into, drug use, and then drug addiction, and then drug dealing, and like, so he's forgotten the person, his true self, and
Yeah.
he's saying, hey, you've forgotten who you truly are. And then he finally, comes around and he's like, yeah, I did forget the face of my father. And
I think
um
I think you're absolutely right that that's what it means. And I wonder if it's I'm just making stuff up in my head now, but I wonder if it's like when a child sees the face of his father. Eddie even says like, "Well, my father was an asshole." Like,
right.
but like even in but whenever you're like an infant, you don't know that, and you see the face
Right.
and you just and it's like a subconscious like longing to like be that one day. And if you doubt yourself and you're doubting not just who you are, but the person that you could be. And I think that's kind of what maybe the
Right.
saying means. I like the saying, but yeah, I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
just I've
And yeah,
wondered.
obviously it's going to come up a whole lot more,
Oh yeah, he's a
it's
Roland's face your father this, face your father
yeah,
that. Just
exactly. Um but yeah, this is like a big pivotal moment in the not only the relationship between Roland and Eddie, but the relationship between all, because Susanna is all like, y'all need to stop it. And um Roland is definitely a tough love kind of guy.
he's so
He's
much
not
more compassionate in this book than the previous two books.
right. Um, and he brings it out when he needs to be,
Yeah,
like this instance.
yeah. Well,
And he even
yeah.
says he's softened up
It's the
because he's
content.
been,
It's the
yeah,
content,
exactly.
man. Yeah.
And he's been alone for so long, and now he's got people, and now he's starting to soften to these people.
The other day at work, um, this guy I work with, sometimes I start talking about stuff and he doesn't know how to get out of the conversation and he just lets me talk. And I can tell what's going on. And so I try to like tone it down and get out. But he's read the Dark Tower series all the way through, and we got on this very subject. We were talking about how Roland in this book's so much more compassionate, and I was telling him about how I thought it was because of Susanna and Eddie, and like they're kind of sharing this like consciousness in a way, and I think that their sensibilities has made Roland like more compassionate and have those sensibilities, and like I mean, but what I just described there, that was like a 20-minute conversation of basically just me talking and this guy
Right.
going,
Yeah. Well,
and I
I
was
get you.
thinking, oh, and he knows about the podcast, so he might listen to this. But I was thinking, this poor guy is just waiting for me to stop talking so he can leave.
Start glancing at the watch. Somebody calling me?
Yeah. So sorry about that. Sorry about that, Jerry. If you're listening, Jerry, just tell me to shut up. So
It's
the speaking circle.
yeah. Jake knows where he's got to be. He finds out like because he made up the name of a school earlier. Like he had gone to
Yeah,
school and he thought that that's where he was trying to go, but then the guy's like, "Oh no, there's no school, but there's a Marquee Avenue." So Jake
right.
takes off running to there and then going back. After the whole big confrontation thing, Eddie starts working on the key again, and he's like, "Okay, I'm finished." And he puts it away, and he grabs this big long stick, and he kind of sharpens the end of it, kind of like a spear type, pencil type thing, and it's like, "I'm going to need this too." And you're like, "Okay." And then he's like, "We've got to get there, but tonight, it's not tonight. It's like we should sleep, and it's going to be tomorrow." So they do that. And another thing happens here once they wake up the next morning is they start walking and everything. And about an hour after they start walking, they start hearing like a rhythmic drumming, and they each kind of have their own ideas. Drums is what Roland thought. Eddie thought it was like a lot of machinery, and Susanna thought it was a huge diseased beating heart. But they know it's coming from the city.
Okay, yeah.
And so they're what is this kind of thing?
Yeah.
And then once they first heard it, it lasted for about 2 hours, and it just stopped.
Oh man.
And then here's whenever it flashes back to Jake, and the guy is telling him before, he's like, it's that avenue, the street you want is right by this movie theater. And Jake runs there, and he stops, and he looks at the movie theater, and it's Sergio Leone movies. It was like The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and I forgot what the other one was. But and then there's a big cardboard cutout inside of Clint Eastwood with the serape and the thing. And, Sergio Leone and his movies were a big inspiration for The Dark Tower.
Right.
And Clint Eastwood was a big inspiration for Roland.
For Roland, yeah.
So that's, Jake is seeing, which is kind of cool. But then, when he's there, he hears these people talking, and he realizes it's Eddie and Henry, and he kind of hides because he was warned not to let them see him and stuff, and he realizes that Henry's a dick, and just not a very nice guy, and he realizes that Eddie's begging Henry to take him somewhere, which we know is the mansion. But he doesn't want to go. It's not that he doesn't want to go, but he's trying to hold something else over Eddie, and they wind up playing basketball for a little while, and that's when Jake sees the whole thing about him being a better basketball player, but letting Henry win and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So then you go back to the group, and they get to the circle. They don't go in quite yet. And instead it looks like Stonehenge. And Eddie's like, "Oh, I got to draw something in there. But I can't do it yet." And it's not time. And that's when Roland tells Susanna, "Hey, we might need data."
Yeah.
So she's like, "Oh yeah, that bitch is always around." And basically he tells him, "Hey, this is Eddie's thing. We're just going to be his bodyguards." And he explains to her that there is a demon that is not here right now, but as soon as we step into this ring, he's like, "I think we've awoken it, but it's not here. But as soon as we go in here, it's going to come. And it's not human, but it will be either male or female." And we find out, back in the Gunslinger that, they're very sexually attracted. They're very sexual things. And he's like, basically, one of us, if it's a female, I'm going to have sex with it. If it's a male, you're going to have sex with it. And
I guess it could be interested. It still could be interested in the same sex.
Well, that's what she's. One of them says that. I think Susanna says,
"What if he's bisexual?"
and he's like, "Well, we'll both take it.
We'll both have to do it."
But so essentially, it's going to want to. The demon doesn't want somebody using the circle for their own purposes.
Yeah.
And so it's going to do everything it can to stop, because it's going to know that Eddie's trying to do some sort of magic. So
Well,
it's going to want to stop him.
even in the Gunslinger, Roland had to have sex with the demon to see the future.
Yeah, and to keep it away
Or
from
was he seeing the
Jake.
future? What was he seeing?
Well, he was seeing all kinds of, because he took mushrooms too,
Oh yeah.
which was
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah,
Or
that's
he
a wild book.
took mescaline. But basically it's like the only way to distract it is to tempt it with something that it wants even more than to keep Eddie from doing this, which is sex.
Yeah.
And then Eddie kind of like casually drops in, oh, by the way, there's a monster
Yeah, that's
that's
right.
living in between these two
The
worlds.
worlds. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I forgot about that. He mentions that he sees that, and it reminded me of the Seven Stones in Ackerman's Field, or
yeah, right.
what was the
Well,
name
it
of that
is.
book?
So, Ian.
In. Yeah, that was what I thought about. There was like how that was like this like monster between worlds, and
So this is,
these thin regions,
yes.
and like this is
So,
one of those thin areas.
so there's a obvious in this series you'll delve into it more, but there's in the mist, in it,
Mm-hmm.
so there's you've got all these worlds, that are strung along the tower,
Right.
and endless worlds, but there's spaces in between those worlds, and in it they call it the Prim, and
Mm.
there's things that live in the Prim, in these
Wow.
doorways between worlds, and it is like one of these creatures that is escapes the Prim. And then, did you ever see The Mist, the movie? I don't think you've probably read it, but like,
No, I've never read it. I have seen the
it,
movie, but it's been a long time.
all the creatures come out in the mist. Well, the company in that, they had been experimenting with trying to
Oh yeah.
find these other worlds, and they opened a
Yeah.
portal, but they only opened the portal as far as into the Prim, and that's when all the creatures started coming through.
Huh.
So this is what even though they don't come right out and say it, I'm assuming this is a Prim monster that's in between, because they even say, like, this is when Jake enters the house,
Mm-hmm.
finally, he's like, I'm no longer in my world, but I'm
Yeah.
not in Roland's world yet. I'm in between, and that's when the house starts basically coming alive.
Yeah, that
And
was a
Jake,
really cool scene.
yes, but Eddie knows now that it's time. It starts raining. He steps into the circle.
It
He
starts
starts
like
doing his
helling. It
thing,
starts
like hella raining,
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
um, and the demon finally comes, and it's they can tell it's masculine, and it goes for Eddie, and so Detta has to get its attention, and
Yeah.
she immediately, like, she's like, come at me, big boy, and all this stuff, and like, you like, the way I picture it is you can't really see it. I don't know if it's more like a predator type thing, like maybe
Mm.
there's a shimmer or something, but like her clothes start immediately getting ripped to shreds,
Yeah.
and like, she's she says, like, Detta, for the first time ever, is scared, like,
Yeah.
like, this thing is more than what she was expecting. And then at the same time, Jake knows that, he goes into the house, and he feels something, like that something's coming. Like, he knows, like, there's some other malevolence in this house, and like, these spiders start dropping in on him and trying to bite him, and he's throwing them, and he starts freaking out,
Right.
and he he kind of like makes a bolt. He kind of like runs off, kind of needlessly, and then, like, on the other side, but
She
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
She's not in control of this situation.
At first,
At first, and and she but it's almost like she is trying to convince herself that she is.
Right.
And I found that I don't know. I that was one of those moments where Stephen King makes you very uncomfortable.
Right. And like he definitely makes you be uncomfortable with that on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And then like cuz yeah, I mean it's definitely happening what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
That is what's happening. And then Roland says, you know, hey, sex is its weapon and its weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to turn the weapon into the weakness. And that's when her mind kind of shifts and she's like, oh no, no. She's like, I'm going all out now. And like
Yeah.
she puts her arms around it and she takes control of the situation. And she wraps her legs and holds it in and holds his neck. And it changes where before she was scared, now she can sense that it's becoming scared because it's never experienced something like this before where
Right.
like that it's being controlled and it wants to get away and she's like, oh no honey, and like she's giving all of her data stuff
Yeah.
and
Which,
and like
if this is, which you've read the rest of the book, but if this is like before, where whenever Detta's in control, Odetta is not, and then she kind of comes to and doesn't know what happens to her, what is she going to think whenever she comes back to her personality? And, well, Susanna, though, as opposed to Odetta. Maybe it's different. Susanna probably has an understanding of what happens in both.
well I would say I think more, you know, Odetta hasn't really been talked about much. And I think
Mm-hmm.
not that Odetta's not there anymore, but I think the two main personalities now are Susanna
And when
and
she
Detta,
really needs Detta, yeah.
and then when she needs Detta.
In this world, it's probably rare that you would need Odetta.
Right. Because I think Susanna is mostly Odetta. Like,
Yeah.
I think she's just
Yeah.
a
Well,
combination of everything. But more tough and more hard than Odetta was.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, and not for my, even though I know for my thing, I think Susanna would I think she is
Yeah.
letting Detta take control, but I think she's right there with Detta,
Yeah.
like involved, but just a secondary part of it. Um, but yeah, so then it goes back to Jake, and he's running further in, and he comes to these doors, and he knows like that's it, that's the door, and he looks, and it says the boy on it, just like
Yep.
the prisoner and the Lady of Shadows and the Pusher and all that. So he knows that this is it. This is the doorway. This is where I need to be. And then he sees the monster. The monster starts basically the house starts kind of piling together and creating this face and this arm coming out and like it's coming down the hallway like
Yeah.
and
The
that's such a good
yeah.
visual of
The
what's
way this
happening
was
there.
described, it was like a face begins pushing through the like sheetrock of the wall, but he says it's like a face trying to push through a wet sheet.
Yes.
I thought that was a really good way to describe it, and yeah, that part was really cool.
Yeah.
And I could see that. I don't remember how in the movie he does go to like an old house and goes through a door,
They kind of do this
but there was
scene because
never. But none of the there was there anything that was trying to chase him or
there was
something?
a monster, but it was not done
I got to
like
tell
this.
you, I don't even remember that movie.
You know, I try to forget it. So
I don't
yeah.
even- the only thing I remember about it is Idris Alba and that kid, but I don't remember anything else about it.
Right. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Just wipe your mind of that one.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, but like, so you know, obviously, you're gonna freak out and be
yeah,
kind of like, I mean, this house is coming at me, going to try and eat me, and he's fumbling and he's trying to get the key out to open the door, and he drops the key. You know, the old
yeah.
trope. it's
When I read this scene, I was picturing it was like a 2-story house, and so he had somehow dropped it, and now he had to go downstairs and find it and come back. And I was like, oh God, it's like he's never gonna get this done.
But so like immediately like Jake's panicking because he's dropped this, and then Eddie knows, hey, Jake's in trouble. We gotta do what we're gonna do. And the rain is pouring down like even harder, and like what Eddie had drawn was a big door, and he puts the doorknob in the keyhole, and he's like, he notices like the rain is washing it away, so he's like, he tells Roland, hey, you're gonna have to come put a cover over me, or we're doomed. And Roland's like, I can't leave Susanna. He's like, do you want to leave Susanna and save the boy, or like, you're going to have to make that decision. And so, or it's going to fail. We're going to fail if you don't.
Right.
And so Roland does it, puts it over there, and then Eddie realizes that something's missing, and then he writes the boy in the dirt, and then immediately, like, it materializes into like a door,
right,
and where you can put the key in, and he looks through the keyhole, and he can see Jake on the other side of the door. Like Jake's trying to pull up boards and stuff to get the key, and he's getting close, and then Jake manages to get the key, and he puts it in the keyhole, and he opens the door, and it's just solid dirt, and there's nothing else behind it. And then Eddie's like, now he knows he has to use his key, and he puts his key in there, and he tries to turn it, and of course it doesn't work. And all of the
oh yeah, I
the
forgot
things
about
come
this part.
back. All those things come back to Eddie, like I've failed and blah blah. And he's like, no, he was like, you know this, you can do this. And he remembers the key, and he's like, he knew it was the little S-shaped thing. Yeah. And he says he calmly pulls out, and he asks for the knife, and he takes just a tiny little sliver off of it, and puts it back in there, and turns it and everything. And then like the monster's basically got Jake, he's got him by the shoes, and then he gets his pants, and he rips his pants off and all that stuff. And then Eddie opens the door, and Roland immediately like jumps through, and
I had a question about this part. Why didn't he jump inside Eddie's, or why was Roland able to like materialize through the door instead of like in the previous book jumping inside of Jake's
his mind
consciousness? Yeah,
I don't know that. I've thought about that too. I'm just assuming it's just,
I couldn't remember if he had done anything similar to that at the end of the book in the Drawing of the Three, when he does the thing with the train. But in that scene, he's
in Jack Moore until the very end. So I mean, I think it's just maybe because it's a different type of door. Maybe I mean that's the only thing I can. But yeah, Roland tells Susanna that he basically gets Susanna over to close to where they are, and is like, release it when I tell you. And then like he's like, now, and she releases the demon, and it flies toward Eddie, and Roland grabs it, and he jumps through the door with the demon, and throws the demon essentially at the monster that's in there to distract it. And one of the cool things about this scene is the orientation of everything. So they're on the ground opening the door, so they're looking down, but Jake is vertical looking out, but looking up.
Yeah.
And so Roland jumps in down, but he comes through the door, and then like to get back out, they can't just walk through, they have to climb through, even though like that was kind of a interesting little thing. But yeah, so finally, they managed to get through. Roland's about to collapse, and then like they're trying to pull him. He's like Eddie's pulling Roland's hair out and all this stuff,
his beard and stuff. Yeah,
his beard, and then like Jake finally like is able to climb out, and then it gets both of them are able to get out, and then like the first thing, Jake kind of like laying there, and he like looks over at Susanna and is like, "Hey, I'm Jake," and she's like, "I'm Susanna." He's like, the first thing he's asked, "Does your family own a railroad?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "What? No, my family owns some dentistry like things." And he's like, "Oh." And then Jake talks to Eddie, and then he says, "Oh, you haven't found the train yet." And he says in the writing, King says it's not a question, it's a statement. "Oh, you haven't found the train yet."
Right.
And then they both Roland and Jake both say, "Oh, now the voices they're gone. The different voices is back to one voice." And then Roland promises, that he'll never leave Jake again. And Jake's like, "Will you let me fall?" He's like, "No, I'll never let you fall." But then internally, Roland's like,
he thinks back. Yeah, he thinks about the tower and wonders. Yeah, I like how they ended the sentence says that like he thinks about the towers and wonders. It doesn't say, and he wonders whether he really would, or he wonders like it leaves it for your interpretation, but it's implied.
Well, that's what he says. He says Roland promises to never leave Jake again, but knows Ka may say otherwise.
Oh, so, I didn't remember that.
Yeah, so he's like, yeah, but if fate allows it, I might have to let you die again, but I'm not planning on letting you die.
I missed that line.
I
want to go back.
So yeah, so and then that's how this part essentially ends. Is them all together now, and
so they're finally all together. Still no train. Yeah. Still no train. Still train on the cover of the book. Still no train. But I imagine this whole next section, lousy with train.
Lousy with trains.
Yeah.
Charlie the Choo Choo.
Yep. So now, look, what's the? I don't have my copy in reach.
Next is Book 2, Lud, A Heap of Broken Images. First part is Town and Quartet.
Town and Quartet. All right. We're going to go to that town and find a train. Start that bad boy up. Drive it to Chicago.
That's right. So that was a really good. I like that section a lot. I like the dream sequences. I like the back and forth with the action. So you know what's going on, and I love the fact that Jake knows Eddie, and Eddie knows. Like I remember, when they get back together at the end, Eddie's like, "Yeah, I remember. I kind of remember you." From when I was 13, and stuff like that, seeing the kid at the thing, and you're like, dude, that's kind of cool. Like,
yeah, it's it was a good story, and it was good coming together. The climax at the speaking circle was completely unexpected, again, like the rest of this series, but it was it was interesting, and it was a good way to draw back to the first book. To give some consequence to those scenes in the gunslinger. I thought.
Yeah, and even I think Roland says, I can't remember if he was internalizing or if he was saying something to Eddie or Susanna, but he's like, it's time that Jake is to be drawn, and that kind of like harkens back to the drawing and all that stuff. So,
yeah, really good. Really good. Can't wait to read the next section. Okay.
Good.
All right. This was a long one, David. This was a long episode. I might split this one into two. Might split it at the All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll get together next week to do the next part. And if who knows, something comes up between now and then. There's
we're gonna still do 1899 if we want to too.
Oh yeah, all right. Let's get together and do 1899. And
you can watch ahead too if you want to.
I've already watched two. I've already watched 2 episodes, and I was going to tell you that. I was going to say I was going to tell you we need to speed it up because since we know the show's canceled.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. Now it doesn't really matter.
I might just watch the whole thing and then we'll just get together and wrap it
talk
up.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, I'll do that. That way we got an excuse to do it because we can be like, they announced there's no next season, so we just thought we'd go ahead and just wrap this whole thing up.
Just wrap the whole thing up. Yeah, there you go. That works.
I'll watch it. All right. Until next week, until there's another open game license drama or any nonsense like that, thanks for listening and peace.
Long days and pleasant nights.
That's right. Don't forget the face of your father.